Yes, can start.
Yes. Uh, Good evening to all, and thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you on this essentially a plastic surgery topic. So I think a lot of general surgeons may not be very interested with what is happening, but the general surgeons will have to deal with burns at the outset, and then maybe it will need a more specialized care. So it would be nice if all have an overview of how to handle burns, what are the types, how do we assess it, etc. So let us start with the presentation. The guide map of this talk is going to be like this. We are going to find out how burns occur. Why is the burn injury so devastating, and what are the types of burns? How do you assess a burn victim? What are the different types of burns, and what are the essential steps in management, and what essentially should be the take-home message? So as you are seeing a lot of pictures here, the first and a very common type of accidental burns is scalds. Scalds means it's a burn due to a hot liquid. And then you have flame burns. This is the most common and the most devastating type of burns that you will see, flame burns. These burns are because of an electrical injury. There are so many types of electrical burns that we will be dealing with in a moment. And this is a chemical burn. We also have radiation burns nowadays because of the use of ionizing radiation for the treatment of cancers. So we have, these are all the types of burns. Now, so as I told you, the flame burn is the most common, followed by the scars, followed by the electrical and the other types of burns. Now, it is common knowledge that the most common etiology for a severe burn is actually suicide. And that is a very, very bad way to die. So if something maybe we as doctors should impress upon people is never try to commit suicide with burns. So that is a very, 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 very pathetic way to take a life. And sometimes it is homicide. Work-related burns will usually be accidents or scars, which occur in young children, especially in the homes. And the way you have to assess is whenever it is an accidental burn, it is usually not a very deep burn or a burn which has a very high percentage. So if those two things are there, then most probably there is some pathology, not the usual accident which is causing the burn. Now, where do burns occur? Most of the times it is in the house. Accidental burns occur in the workplace. Sometimes when you're having a large gathering and there is not adequate safety measures, then there may be some burns, a fire accident and causing burns. So this is the most of the burns occur in the home, and that is what is to be remembered. Why is a burn injury so devastating? Why are there so many associations for burns? Why is this a topic in most of our conferences? Why is there a separate class of plastic surgeons who deal only with burns? Okay, that is because the skin is one of the crucial organs of our body, and it has a lot of important functions. First, it prevents the inner tissue from injury and exposure. It's very important in temperature regulation. It prevents an excessive loss of water from inside our system. It is a very important sensory organ because the brain is continuously informed about the environment because of an intact skin. So when that is damaged, then there is a loss of so many sensations. So a proprioception, a sense of what is happening in the external environment, because we are no longer able to assess temperature that well. And then of course it maintains the identity of a person. So just imagine if you don't have skin covering over you, then how would you call yourself whom you are, right? So before we go to more deeply into burns, we need to know the anatomy of the skin very well. So the skin is mainly consisting of two layers. One is the epidermis, which is a thinner layer, and then you have a slightly thicker dermis, which you can classify into two, an upper papillary and an inner reticular dermis. So this is essentially the skin anatomy. In the dermis, you have a lot of structures which are important in regeneration after burns. For example, the hair follicle, the sweat glands, and all these sensory nerve endings, and the blood vessels. Now, when does burn occur? Of course, we all know that it is because of exposure to high temperatures. It depends on the amount of temperature, the amount you are exposed, and also the thickness of the skin. So, especially in children and in old people, because their skin is thinner, you will have the degree of burn is going to be even more severe. Now, then we come to the types of burns. This is a type of burn. The picture you're seeing is a lightning burn, right? The type of burns I have already told you in the previous slide that they can be flame burns, which occur due to dry heat. And what we need to know is, suppose the temperature is 44 degrees. Maybe it is a very hot day and the person is exposed outside, 44 degrees centigrade. Then if you're continuously 6 hours outside, then you have a chance of getting burnt. But just 1 second is enough if the temperature is about 60 degrees centigrade. So that is the correlation between the temperature and the duration of the burn. Similarly, for scalds, even if the water temperature is 60 degrees, 5 seconds is enough for you to develop a scald. Whereas if a water temperature is as low as 49, then it takes about 5 minutes for the damage to occur in the skin. So this, what you're seeing, is a scald burn in a small child who fell into hot water. Now, this is very important in the understanding and the management of burns. Whenever you see a burnt lesion, there are three zones. There is an inner zone, which is, called the zone of coagulation. That is, that area, because of the intense damage, that area is dead. Now, just outer to that zone is the zone of injury. This is a zone of stasis where the cells are injured, the cells are edematous, but then this area can either become alive by your good treatment, or it can die if your treatment is not very good. So our essential aim in burns is to reduce the burn of injury so that it does not go into this zone of coagulation. And then you have a zone of hyperemia. You can see it here, where there are a lot of inflammatory exudates which are coming in, but essentially there is blood vessels also in that area. So you will, by good treatment, be able to salvage that area. Right. So now we go to the degrees of burns. In the first degree burn, essentially is, we will commonly know it as a sunburn. This is an area which is not burned. So exposure to the sun, it was just red all the other areas. Now, essentially, it is only the epidermis which has got burnt, and therefore that area is red and pink or painful. There will be some irritation also, but the dermis is intact. So there will be a spontaneous healing within 7 days. All you need to do is just moisturize that area, and it is seldom clinically significant. Now we go to the burns that you need an intervention. Okay, so the next would be a superficial partial thickness burn. So in a partial thickness burn, if it is superficial, then the epidermis will be involved, yes. But then along with the epidermis, the upper portion of the dermis, called the papillary dermis, is also involved. So this is the type of burn that we most often see in all our cooking accidents, whereby you see this area which is pink, very, very painful, and there will be a blister. It blanches to the touch. When you press against this pink area, it becomes white. The hairs are usually intact below, and when you again treat well, then it will heal maximally without scarring. This is another example of partial thickness burns. This is day 1 when we receive the patient. day 3 after we have done a good debridement of all the dead tissues, and this is day 15 when it has healed, nearly healed, and within 1 month it should be completely a healed lesion. So this is superficial partial thickness burns. Now we come to the next variety, which is deep partial thickness burns. That is, not only the papillary dermis is involved, the deeper layer of the dermis, the reticular dermis, is also involved. So how do we recognize that? The area of the burn will be mottled red and white. It is not that painful. That is because the dermal elements of the sensory elements have all been burnt. So it is not that very painful as a superficial burn. It does not blanch and it heals within 3 weeks, but it might scar. So the areas which are slightly deeper, we may have to remove it and graft. So this is an example of a deep partial thickness burn. Another deep partial thickness, extensive deep partial thickness burn, as we debride and then we have applied a system of dressing, and then we go in for meshed skin grafting, early meshed skin grafting. The areas have healed. This is within 1 week, this is at 10 days, and here within 20 days. You see that most of the areas healed. There are a few small raw areas which need to be grafted. Now the entire message here is a burn, when whatever degree, whatever type of burn comes to us, we will have to try to heal the burn within a month. So that should be our aim of treatment. Now we come to full thickness burns. Full thickness burns are classically burns which occur with immolation or maybe with high voltage electric current, and it goes deeper into the fat. It can be of various colors. The classical feature is it is inelastic and leathery, and it will be painless. Now the way of healing of this burn is the entire area which is charred is dead. So this has to heal only from the periphery. It cannot heal at the area of the burn itself. So you will always have to excise it and graft it. So in summary, again, this is a pictorial representation of the 3 types of burns. Here you see the epidermis with a little amount of the dermis being involved. There is a big zone of injury in a superficial partial thickness burn. Whereas in a deep partial thickness burn, you see the injury is extending a little more into the reticular dermis. There is an involvement of the hair follicles, some vessels and nerves. And in a full thickness burn, the entire amount of skin is lost, and therefore this whole thing has to be excised. It cannot heal from tissues. This burn can heal from some amount from this dermis. This burn will always heal through the entire amount of dermis present, whereas this full thickness has to be excised and grafted. Now, always with a burn, we will have to be very worried of inhalation burns which occurs along with a burn injury. How does actually an inhalation occur? That is because of the flame which causes smoke, the steam in a scald burn, and suppose you are inhaling some gas. So all of these are mechanisms by which an inhalation burn can occur. Inhalation burns are not always associated with a burn, but then the problem is 90% of the deaths which occur from burns is because of the inhalation component. So there can be a direct damage because of the thermal burn, because of the swelling which is coming after that in the airway. There is not enough oxygen and there is hypoxia, and this is the reason why people die. Right. The main factor which is responsible is the carbon monoxide that accumulates in the smoke, and the carbon monoxide having a 200 times greater affinity for hemoglobin than oxygen, and therefore it displaces the oxygen molecules and combines. The person, what are the ways that we are able to assess that the person is having a carbon monoxide burn? Initially, it starts off with headache when there is about 20% of carbon monoxide in the system, and slowly it proceeds to confusion and coma and death. But will we be able to detect it with a pulse oximeter? No. Usually, saturation in a pulse oximeter will be nearly normal. And therefore, in these cases, we should not trust a pulse oximeter, but we will have to assess if the patient has an inhalation burn and start treatment immediately. How do we assess that? Whenever you find in the history the patient is having a burn in a closed space, there is a facial burn. You can see the patient and you see that there is a lacrimation, there is a red eyes, he's coughing, and the cough is having blackish sputum, carbonaceous sputum we call it. The voice is hoarse, there are singed hairs on the head, on the nose, the patient is not able to breathe well, he's wheezing, there is a facial edema, there is definite inhalation burn, and that has to be treated. How do we treat? High flow cool oxygen is given. We'll have to monitor with blood gas analysis. The essential idea is to give 100% oxygen via a non-rebreathing face mask. We have to nebulize with many things so that we bring out these thick fibrin plaques, these carbonaceous plaques which deposit. So we'll have to bring them out either by nebulizing with heparin saline or N-acetylcysteine or salbutamol, gentle chest physiotherapy. If you find that he is not maintaining saturations, always be aware that you have to immediately intubate him and ventilate. And then bronchoscopy. Bronchoscopic lavages is one good means of handling inhalation burns. So when a person is at a scene, what are the things that you really need to size up before you can take action, right? Whenever we see patients coming to a victim coming to our clinic, we always find that they are quite lucid, quite clear in their mental state, but they can be very, very sick. So the severity of the injuries may not be apparent. We will have to assess that. Then we will have to be aware that not only the patient will be in a very volatile mental state, all the patient guardians, the surrounding atmosphere, everything will be volatile. And at that time, a doctor has to be very careful, very compassionate in the way he acts and the way he talks. And of course, whenever you are going to a scene or when you are seeing a mass burn casualty, a doctor will have to protect himself, because he should not, suppose it is a chemical burn or suppose it is a bad flame burn with a lot of carbonaceous sputum, he should not be getting sick by treating these people. So at home, what should a doctor tell patients when such a burn injury occurs? There's a common accident. What should a doctor tell the patients? Right, water only. We'll have to cool the burn area with water for at least 20 minutes. Do not permit the person to run from the fire. Have him stop, drop, and roll so that the fire goes out. If there is a smoldering cloth, then the cloth should not be pulled away. Many times we see when somebody tries to pull off the cloth, a burning cloth, then the burn becomes more deeper. So the cloth has to be cut away. And we'll have to remember that a burn is dynamic. That means today you think that this is a superficial burn, but you have to be always aware that you have not cooled it enough. Tomorrow it will become a deeper burn. So it has to be remembered. Right. So the initial things that we need to do is to remove any tight rings, bangles, tight clothing. This is a patient I have seen in my casualty. They have started an IV line, yes, but then they have left this ring in the finger, and you can see distal to the ring, the finger has changed color. So this is very, very important. Anything will act as a tourniquet in a burn. So all tight clothing, rings, bangles, etc. have to be removed. Blisters need not essentially be broken. There is a very common problem in most places in the world. I think they suddenly immediately try to apply toothpaste, or in our part we put turmeric, we put some powder, ash, oil, anything is applied on the burn surface. Nothing should be done. It is only water, water and water that is required. A bandage, a loose bandage with gauze or cloth, not cotton. That is what cotton means. I mean the fluffy cotton rolls that we get, because again the cotton will catch on to the burn wound and it will be difficult to remove it later on. That should be used. A painkiller should be given. A tetanus shot should be applied. After the wound heals, then we may have to do some things to make the scar supple. Right. So now, how do we assess a burn victim who has come to the hospital? Always it is only the ABC we start off first. We find out if the airway is adequate, whether the patient is breathing well. After we have assessed both, then we see how much of the body surface area is burnt. What is the depth of the injury? What is the age of the patient? What are the other associated illnesses that the patient has? And whether them certain specific areas are burnt, like face. Face, I told you, there will be inhalation burns. Hands, especially in children, the burns can become very deep. In specific areas like the genitalia, the perineum, especially when there is a small child, then you know that these are deliberate burn wounds, and you will have to be very, very careful in eliciting the history, maybe some child abuse, and we'll have to deal accordingly. So how will you assess the total burn area? There are a lot of these charts which are available to us. The patient's palm is about 1% of his total body surface area. So if it is a small child, and if you're able to find out an idea of how much of the surface of the palm, then roughly you can make an assessment. But we use all these other charts, the rule of 9 and the London Browder chart. This is the rule of 9. I think you all must be aware of it. We divide the entire body into nines. The front of the chest is 9 into 2. The back is again 9 into 2. The arms are 9. The legs are 18. The thigh is 9. The leg is 9. So we divide that, and then we assess the amount of area which is burnt, mark it, and then we find out how much of the surface area is burnt. But this is very inaccurate in children because the children have smaller bodies and bigger heads. So a rule of 9 assessment will not be very correct in children. This is by far the best chart to assess the amount of the burnt surface area. So here you can see in a child, it is nearly, they have given about half of the head is about 18%, whereas in an adult, the head takes about only 7% of the total surface area. So this chart is available. This chart can be used in our emergencies, mark out the areas which are burnt, and then take a correct assessment of what is the total body surface area that is burnt. After we do the primary assessment of the burn, then we start checking on the secondary assessments. What do we try to do? We find out how the burn occurred. What could be the possible mechanism of injury? Look for injuries to the eyes. That is important, has to be dealt with immediately. And then you check for circumferential burns. Whenever there is deep burns like this, the burn itself forms a corset like compartment syndrome, and distally, especially in the hands, there may be pallor. The blood supply would not be there, and there you will have to do an emergency escherotomy. So these are the incisions which are usually done for an escherotomy. Right. How different is now chemical burns and electrical burns from this scenario of flame burns? Chemical burns. A chemical burn will progress as long as the substance remains in contact with the skin. So we wash a normal burn for about 20 minutes. But in a chemical burn, we may have to even wash them for even an hour or more. What we should do is flush with water. If there is powders of chemical, first brush off the powder and then start the washing. The nature of the chemical will decide how severe the burn is. If it is an acid burn, then it is mostly coagulation. So it is self-limited. Whereas in an alkali like lime or cement, then it is a liquefaction necrosis in an alkali. And so what happens? The burn proceeds to go deeper and deeper. So it is much, much more dangerous to have an alkali burn. So what is the quality of the agent? What is the concentration? How long the patient has been exposed? All that will determine a chemical burn severity. This is a patient who's had a burn, a chemical burn with a very peculiar reason. So this is what we usually apply in our hands during marriages, something called henna. So the patient has developed a severe burn because of an allergy to it. So this is how you wash a chemical burn. You remove the patient's clothing, you wash the skin folds at the elbow, at the axilla, at the wrist. So copious amounts of water, and when washing is complete, wash again. So this is the mantra in chemical burns, to keep washing with water. Sometimes in some specific burns, for example, suppose it is hydrofluoric acid, then we may have an antidote in calcium chloride. If it is available, then we may use it. If it is gasoline or diesel fuel, then you wash with soap solution. If it is hot tar, we tend to use mayonnaise or butter actually. What we tend to do is immerse the patient in cold water, then try to apply all this so that you can slowly remove the solidified tar. This is a child who had a phenol burns after debridement at 3 days, and then at 15 days, nearly cured, and 30 days, the child is okay. Now we come to electrical burns. Electrical burns is of various types of electrical burns you can get. If you go to a high electrical field, you can just be hit by a flash of electricity. You can touch an electrical wire and get a contact burn. Suppose when you go near an electrical wire and there is a heating of the atmosphere and there is a flame burn, then you will be hit by an inhalation burn also. And this is a specific thing which occurs only in electrical burns called an arc burn. So I will tell you what happens. Yeah, this is a patient. Contact with the high voltage electric current has made him lose his hand, and he's also having, you can see the burns in the axilla. It is relatively okay here and okay here. So this is called an arc burn because the electricity tends to travel in arcs, not necessarily follow the system inside. So this is an arc burn which occurs in this is an inhalation burns because of fire that has erupted because of a electrical blowout and flash burns. Right. So we have two types of electrical burns, a low voltage burn and a high voltage burn. A low voltage burn occurs because of this classical accidents at home. What happens? There is a pulling effect of a low voltage current and there is a deep burn, but it is a deep full thickness burn, but it is limited in its areas. This is high voltage burns, which essentially ends up in loss of limb or life. Right. Suppose you have a high voltage burn. In a low voltage burn, you classically don't have an entrance and an exit wound. But if it is a high voltage burn, then there are two types of wounds. A wound where the current has entered, and that wound tends to be a little more self-limiting than a wound of exit. These are the wounds where the current has exited, and it is essentially a blowout, a much more massive wound than an entry wound. Now, just see the various paths that the electrical current is taking through the body. So essentially, you cannot say that the electrical burn, what you see in the skin is only this much, but then it has gone all throughout the body in various areas. So an electrical burn should always be considered 100% burn. You cannot say it is a 30% burn, 40% burn based on these skin findings, because it has gone, the electric current has gone into the body, it has damaged muscles, it has damaged bones, damaged the nerves. It will be affecting the kidney, it will be affecting the gastrointestinal system. And so you cannot really say that it is only a 100% burn. So you will have to always take an ECG in an electrical burn to find out what is the situation of the heart. You will have to monitor the urine because the patient may have myoglobinuria because of extensive muscle damage. Now we come to the later parts the uh, of the presentation. Now, what do we do for managing a patient with burns? Right. Forgive the slide; it is a little cluttered, but then what we have to understand is whenever you have a full thickness burn, which involves special areas, whenever it is covering more than 10% of the body surface area, And if a partial thickness burn is more than 30% associated with inhalation injury, or there is fractures, or a burn which is in a small child younger than 5 years, or a burn which is older in a person older than 55 years. These are the burn injuries which are severe. So all the rest are moderate or minor burns. So we will have to remember that a full thickness burn of more than 10%. So the slide I showed you of just a full thickness burn of the hand, the first slide, essentially is a severe burn because it is only 10%, but the patient can lose his life even with that injury. A partial thickness burn, more than 30%, and if there is associated inhalational injury, etc., it becomes severe. How do we manage the burn? In the first 2 or 3 days, what we are essentially trying to manage is the direct damage, the fluid loss and the fluid shifts which occurs, and the patient going into shock. So it needs fluid resuscitation, and it will be the fluid resuscitation. You will have to take in consideration the inhalation injury, how much of full thickness burn is there, and the time since injury, whether any treatment was given at all before the patient came to the hospital. So we are trying to manage the shock in the first 72 hours. After that, we manage the wound. We find out what is to be done of the burn area. Then we try to close the wound as fast as possible within 1 week to 1 month. And then starts the process of rehabilitating the burn patient, of reconstructing lost areas and reintegrating the patient into the society. So essentially, this is what we are going to do in managing a burn patient, right? That is starting, and then you have a chronic phase which sets in after you manage the shock phase. What all happens? The patient goes into a hypermetabolic phase. Inflammation starts. The patient starts wasting in protein. Lean body mass becomes less. And this will always correlate with the extent and the depth of the burn. So what the patient becomes is increased susceptible to infection. And in those cases, we need to urgently remove the burn and provide a skin cover. For example, this is a picture of a wasted chronic burn left to heal slowly. It is never a good idea to allow a burn to heal on its own slowly. That is not the way it works nowadays, right? So first, what do we do? If a fluid resuscitation is delayed for more than 2 hours, then it has been found that mortality increases. And therefore, a person who has more than 20% body surface area burn, we start fluid resuscitation. If it is less than 15, we can give oral fluids. If it is more, then we will start IV lines, maybe even central lines, and start giving fluids. What is the fluid that you will give? There are some criteria. We can go through a lot of guidelines. The most common guideline used in many parts of the world, Parkland formula. During the first 24 hours, the patient will need 4 ml into the body weight of the person and the percentage of the body surface burnt. So suppose it is a 50% burn in a 60 kilogram man, then it is about 12 liters of fluid he will need for 24 hours. Half of that, about 6 liters, is given in the first 8 hours post the burn. That is, if the burn occurred at 12 o'clock, he came to you at 2 o'clock, but then you will calculate from 12 and give within 12 to 8, you will give him 6 liters, and the rest is given over the next 16 hours. But though we have these formulas, the main way by which we will assess whether there is enough fluid going in, whether there is a problem in our resuscitation, whether we are resuscitating more, whether we are resuscitating less, is by monitoring the urine output. In an adult, we would like to keep the urine output about 0.5 to 1 ml per kilogram body weight per hour. In a child, you try to keep it at 1 ml per kilogram body weight per hour. Otherwise, we will essentially make mistakes and over-rehydrate. Even over-rehydrating the burn patient is dangerous. You will be pushing them into pulmonary edema. You will be causing a lot of fluid shifts. You will be aggravating a lot of problems. So we will have to be sure that we are treating the shock adequately by monitoring the urine output. Then, of course, you have to manage the pain. So how would you do that? Narcotic analgesics are proven to be the best. Narcotic analgesics like morphine have even been shown to accelerate healing by a variety of mechanisms. So that is what we try to use in these patients. But then almost always, because we have to deal with medical legal issues, that is, we need to, in a burn patient, there is always the problem of taking the dying declaration, of getting a magistrate to see the patient, and we'll have to deal with ethical issues of whether we are going to allow the patient to be conscious and answer all those questions, or are we going to deal with the pain and give him morphine first. So that we will have to assess as surgeons. After the initial resuscitation, then the next most important thing to handle is nutrition. For the first 24 hours, usually we try to keep them nil oral, because there will be a lot of gastric irritation. The patient may vomit, especially with all the, if there is inhalation, then there will be a lot of edema and it will be difficult. But early nutrition has to be started after the first day, because it has been consistently shown that there is shorter hospital stay, there is accelerated wound healing, decreased risk of infection, and decreased wasting. So early nutrition, preferably by the oral route, is best in these patients. How do we do that? We tend to give a high protein diet, because excess carbohydrates will cause a hyperglycemia. These patients are already going into hypermetabolism. They will be having a hyperglycemia. We will be worsening it by giving them more carbohydrates. Excessive fats have found to induce an immunosuppression, and therefore we use a protein-based diet. We give them a lot of vitamin A and E and even vitamin C. Oxandrolone has been used to reduce the catabolism that occurs, and of course the multivitamins. What are the other adjuncts? Basically, the fluid management, the pain management, the nutrition management, and then you have adjuncts like anti-edema measures. We elevate the limbs. The patient will be lying down, so you'll have to take precautions to avoid bed sores. We will have to counsel the patient to find out why the event occurred, and now how is he going to manage with the pathology of burns. DVT prophylaxis, we start with low molecular weight heparin. Tetanus prophylaxis, if not already given, and ulcer prophylaxis. That is, we start him on a PPI or sucralfate so that he does not develop Curling's ulcers, and gentle physiotherapy to the chest and the limbs. Now, we come to what a surgeon usually tries to do in a burn. What should an ideal burn dressing do? A burn dressing should ideally provide a good environment for wound healing. So such an ideal dressing, is it available? No, unfortunately. So what all should it do? It should provide a moist environment for wound healing. It should conform to the burn. It should control pain, odor. It should not irritate the patient. It should be safe. And when you're removing the dressing, it should be non-traumatic. And of course, it has to be cost effective and convenient to the patient. What are all the burn dressings that we have? We have silicone dressings, foam dressings, alginates, hydrogels for moisture, which moisturizes the wound, and then you have dressings which remove the exudate, that is hydrocolloid dressing, and then you have the Chole dressings like Vaseline, chlorhexidine, antibiotic, etc. Now, this is a bovine collagen dressing, very, very effective in second-degree burns, especially in superficial partial thickness burns, where you have, it is only a one time. Once you nicely clean and then you apply the dressing, and that will be it. Very, very useful in children because they can really not tolerate repeated dressings. Nowadays, we don't use the original silver sulfadiazine, etc. There are narrow silver and ointments available which penetrate better and reduce pain and protect against infection. But my favorite mode of dressing burn wounds is heparin saline. Heparin is very cheap, and heparin saline, heparin has a wonderful action of being a membrane stabilizer and an angiogenesis promoter. What essentially are we trying to do? When we give heparin, it controls the pain. When you spray the heparin itself, the intense burning pain that the patient has will reduce. It will promote the membrane stabilization, it will promote healing, and it is the dose given is 5,000 international units in 500 ml saline locally applied every 3 to 4 hours. It reduces pain, it reduces the edema. There are fewer number of dressings. We need a lesser IV fluid, lesser antibiotic, faster healing, early grafting, lesser hospital stay and mortality. So heparin, being one of the cheapest drugs that is available to us, is a boon when it comes to handling burn patients. Then we come to other dermal substitutes and matrices that is used in a large burn. You have BioBrain, which is usually used in, again, partial thickness burns. I will explain the mechanism of action as we go down. There is Supratel, there is Alloderm. This is used more in full thickness and deep burns. What essentially does BioBrain contain? BioBrain contains a silicone, upper silicone layer, and inside there is a layer which is having a nylon fabric which has collagen peptides. So in a partial thickness burn, what do? We remove that, excise that burn completely. Then we apply BioBrain on that area. BioBrain acts as a substrate from where the dermal elements, the nylon, the collagen which is there, acts as a substrate where the dermal elements start growing in again. And as the burn starts healing, then this outer silicone layer is just peeled off and you have a healed dermal burn. So in a partial thickness burn, BioBrain alone dressings would be very, very useful. Then you have a dressing which is called Alloderm. These are for more deeper wounds, and Alloderm has, in a second layer, has collagen, has elastin, has tubes which can allow the passage of blood vessels. When it is applied on a deeper burn, then slowly the dermis regenerates, and then you can apply a small thin graft over the healing burn. We have similar such other burn dressings like Integra. All of them are bilayer wound matrices, which will give you a neodermis. And on top of that, if you want, you can put in a graft, a thin graft later on. And for temporary covers, we can use the cadaver skin, or you can use a graft taken from other species like bovine or swan. This is a healing with Integra. You can see that there is a full thickness, nearly full thickness burn which has been excised, and then you have a silicone membrane and a patch, a synthetic skin patch. And when you apply that, blood vessels start forming in the dermis. Then you can remove the silicone membrane and you can apply a thin mesh skin graft over it, and you will have a regenerated skin. This is a burn wound which has been, on which Integra has been applied after excising the burn. Now we have keratinocytes and stem cells. The keratinocytes, you can culture the patient's own epithelial cells in a culture medium, and then you can bring it back and you can spray it as a gel, and you can expand it into sheets also. Within 5 weeks, you are able to now culture epidermis and you can use it for grafting. Then there is always the advance of stem cells, which we take from the bone marrow, from the adipose tissue, hair follicles. And this is in a research phase where we are trying to make them, they are totipotent cells, which can form epidermal cells and can be used for burns. So this is a cell spray making process. We have taken out a small amount of skin, we've removed the dermis, then we centrifuge and make it as a cell spray. And this is a keratinocyte culture medium. What are now my take-home messages from this talk? This is a meshed skin graft, which is an important one to use in burns, and 30 days. Within 1 month, we should always try to heal the burns. So what are the take-home messages? Early excision and grafting is the gold standard of management. A patient should not be allowed to heal like this. Burn wound is a focus for sepsis, and it stimulates inflammatory mediators. and therefore a deep burn cannot heal without grafts, and therefore you may have to excise and graft. But we are always worried that if it is not a full thickness burn, it may heal spontaneously, and therefore we'll have to be really clear. Maybe take 2 or 3 days, find out if this area is going to heal by itself or not. There are so many ways now. We have Doppler imaging, all those things which help us find out if the wound is thick, if the scarred area is thick, and then you this is the sequence. We have debrided some amount of granulation, and then we have grafted, and this is the final result. I told you about collagen as a one-time dressing. This is a scald. The patient has been applied collagen and it is dry, and then it is peels off on its own on the 15th day, and by 30 days the wounds are nearly healed. So this is heparin saline, an electrical burn, a flash burn in this child. Heparin saline after debridement has been applied in 15 days. This is the picture in 30 days, and in 7 months and 1 year, it's completely healed and there is practically no scar. A flame burn, which has been, not only heparin saline has been used, but once we realize that these areas are all deep, then we have applied a graft and the patient has healed within 3 months. Suppose it is deep leg burns, then we take an SSG from where we either take it from the back, from the scalp, and then we use measure, and then we are able to heal the wound. Suppose there are deep burns where there is loss of a fingertip, then after debridement, we put in either a cross finger flap. If it is more deeper, we take flaps from the abdomen. And this is an old neglected electrical burn with bone exposed. There we have, in the first stage, we put in a flap, and then later we'll have to do some more corrections for the hand. This is another child with electrical burns exposing the bone. Both areas we have taken out a flap from above in the leg, a fasciocutaneous flaps, and used it for healing of the bone. The essential idea is to heal the wound with graft or flap. Sometimes in extensive electrical burns, we may have to use one by one phases of the rungs of the ladder. A deep electrical burn, most of the humor is exposed. We first put a huge graft. After healing, then the humor for the humerus, we have put in a latissimus dorsi. This is the latissimus dorsi, but still there is some amount of bone which in an electrical burn to heal the wound is very, very difficult because of the deep injury. So we'll have to use, and then a pectoralis major has been used. So many rungs of the ladder has been used to save this hand. Burns should never heal like this. It should never heal with so much of hypertrophy and scarring. So bad scars, grotesque no function, and chronic pain should never be a result of a burn. It was an accident, and it should not become a lifelong curse for the patient. So in summary, it is best to prevent a burn, and the skin has many critical functions. It is a cutaneous injury caused by heat. Burns can affect any part of the body. It can be superficial, partial thickness, or full thickness. Inhalation burns are a sure way to die. Establishing the scene's safety should be your first priority in responding to a burn call. Once you have the airway, breathing, and circulation, then you assess the burn. Burn shock, you'll have to have capillaries which leak, and therefore you need adequate fluid resuscitation. Burns more than 20% will need IV fluids. Pediatric patients are most easily harmed, and therefore along with fluids, you need to even give glucose from day one. Elderly patients are sensitive to respiratory insults. They have poor glycogen stores, so be careful about nutrition. Principles of treatment: reduce thermal injury using water, overcome the shock with IV fluids, provide adequate pain relief, antibiotics, and nutrition, provide skin cover as fast as possible. On an average, we say if the patient has a 1 day inpatient treatment per percentage total body surface. That is, if there is 30% burn, then within 30 days, the patient should heal. So that is the average that we try to use. Now we are able to treat burns much better because we have a better understanding of burn shock. There is a lot of advancements in fluid therapy and antibiotics. We are able to excise wounds faster and graft, and we use a lot of biological dressings. And it is always a team of doctors, nurses, nutritionists, physiotherapists, social worker, and a psychologist who acts. We are able to do that so that this patient is able to then use his hand and say namaste. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Um, can I?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nila, for this very informative and precise presentation. And we really enjoy this presentation. Now it is time for discussion. We are welcome our eminent Professor Rashid Ahmed Abdullah, Professor Muhammad Ahmed Ibn Auf, Mr. Ahmed Adam, and all of our colleagues. I think it is a time for discussion. Anyone have any question? Please unmute yourself and ask your question. Dr. Hala, please unmute yourself.
Hello everyone, thank you for this nice presentation. I'm Hala Salah, I'm registrar of plastic surgery. I'm just need to tell my colleagues that fluid should be started and calculated from the early time, as you tell them when the victim came to us late, so we have to calculate fluid from the earlier time of the injury. Is it okay?
Yes.
And okay. Especially the first 8 hours. If he came late, 4 hours late, we have to give him the amount of fluid we calculated from the burner surface area within these 4 hours. Then the remaining fluid calculated should be in the 16 hours.
Yes, you will have to calculate fluids always from the time of the burn, not from the time that he has come. But suppose the patient comes after 24 hours, then all these formulas are not going to be of any use. You have to use, you have to start resuscitation and then assess according to urine output, according to the other parameters of shock.
Okay. My question is that can we use some function slab for hand bear to prevent contraction in axilla, hands, finger, or something like that? Or this is not applicable?
Yes, you will always have to use. You will always have to use splints when there is a hand injury, when there is hand burns, and whenever there is a burn across the axilla, and always there will be a use for splints to keep them in the functional position, so that as they heal, they don't go into contractures.
Okay. And I'm really interested about heparin saline dressing application.
Yeah.
In burn. It's really nice. But my question is that how to apply it here in Sudan? We just apply Vaseline gauze, some sterile gauze, and we use all layer dressing for burn because there is no sheath and no collagen or something like that. So how to apply it every 3 to 4 hours? And I mean, we have
heparin saline. What we do is, when the patient comes, we take the patient to the after resuscitating, when we take the patient for dressing, we do the dressing under IV sedation, or even under anesthesia, complete anesthesia. We debride all the we debride the burn area, not excise. We debride. Okay. Debride the burn area and give a nice wash. Then after that, we apply the tules, paraffin tule, and we have those tules which are impregnated in antibiotic. So we apply that, and on top of that, we prepare the heparin. I've told you 5,000 international units of heparin and 500 ml of saline. Then we put that heparin onto Gamgee pads. We make pads are you aware of Gamgee pads, where we make a big roller pads? So then we soak the heparin, soak the pads in that heparin, and then we apply it as a dressing over the burn area, and then we apply a firm bandage. Now, this dressing will remain moist for maybe about 4 hours, 5 hours. After that, when it becomes dry, we instruct the sister to take the heparin saline in a syringe and then re-moist, make the dressing again moist. So that is what we do. Heparin saline is a very beautiful way of dressing the wound, because patient immediately has so much of relief of pain, and as I told you, there is accelerates healing. It lessens the need for antibiotics, as practically there isn't any infection. More importantly, I told you, there is a zone of stasis, that is a zone of injury, which you want to prevent from going into a dead burn, okay, a dead area. That is achieved by heparin saline. The next day when you open the wound, the next time, I do a dressing only every 2 to 3 days. Maybe the initial I'll do it in the second day, but otherwise I do it every third day or even the fourth day as it starts healing. So when we remove the dressing the next day, we find that all the areas which we thought that maybe it will die would have healed, would have come into the zone of hyperemia. So that is what is the beauty of heparin dressings.
Welcome, Dr. Ahmed Adam.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Nila, for this very informative and up-to-date talk. We enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is my voice is clear?
Yes, your voice is clear.
I have 2 comments and I have 2 questions, if you would please. First of all we know that the primary measures in dealing with pain patient, that is utmost, and the actual outcome, it depends on the primary resuscitation, and all knowledge governing burn management are there in the primary measures. I mean, fluid replacement, pain relief, and others. Ultimately, the secondary measure actually was very nicely addressed. Now, my question regarding the dressing environment that you mentioned, it is very nice that promoting wound healing, and it's comfortable for patient, relieving pain and even odor control, and it is an allergic. So I just need to ask, what is your experience regarding natural honey? Because it covers all of these aspects, even if it's cost effective. I came across a study early on in 2005, and we used to use a natural honey in pediatric patients that underwent sustained burn. And we observed that the rate of scar formation is actually less when compared to other modalities of types of dressing. And we use it for... Yes, please.
Yeah.
We use this type of dressing for entire... Yes, carry on. Sorry for that.
Yes, we honey, as you say, honey has a lot of healing properties, and I have read that it would be one of the ideal dressings that are available. But I have not used honey personally. So though it is available here, and it is a cheaper, maybe not as cheap as heparin saline, but honey is of course well tolerated, and but I have not used honey. I have only read it that it is a very good dressing material, and it will it also promotes and accelerates the healing rate. But I am not able to comment more on it because I have not used it personally, so I will not know how it fares with regards to heparin saline or even collagen for that matter. Once it is a partial thickness wound, if we clean it well and apply collagen, it is a one-time dressing. It will heal completely. The wound will heal from inside in 10 days, and then you just have to remove the collagen. Or you don't have to remove, the collagen will come off by itself. So these are the two very nice ways of dressings that we employ. After that, when we assess within 1 week and we see that this wound is not going to heal primarily, we immediately go for skin grafting. So that is how we do it.
Thank you very much. Yes, we had an experience with a natural honey in Khartoum Teaching Hospital 2005 up to 2007 with one of our eminent pediatric surgeons, Dr. Said Ali, and we observed that the rate of healing, time factor-wise, cost-wise, even the post-referral time for plastic surgery. You know, early on, we don't have enough plastic surgeons, so general surgeons, they used to manage burn patients. I think even in the international literature, there is a well-published series regarding these types of modality of wound dressing. My next question is, what is your management for unstable scar following burn? Do you preferring doing scar excision later in those late presented cases? What is the modality of treatment of unstable scar?
You're talking about the hypertrophic scars?
No, not hypertrophic scar, unstable scar. Those scars that
unstable scars. Okay. Yeah. No, that is that. See, the idea would be to not leave behind unstable scars. An unstable scar is going to form in an area where it would have required a skin grafting. So suppose we have not done it at the time and allowed the scar to heal by itself, then only that scar becomes unstable. So the principle and management of burn is, please don't allow an unstable scar to form. One, suppose in chronic burn wounds, chronic that is a burn wound now and then the patients present 15 years later, 20 years later with unstable scars, high chance of that scar becoming a malignancy, also a Marjolins ulcer. If it comes like that, then you will have to widely excise and apply graft or a flap or whatever the situation requires. So in a burn, it is better that you ensure a healing without any area of unstable scars. Is that okay?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? How do you usually manage post the burn, post the healing? Is there any input? Dr. Mohammed?
Yeah,
I'm not
please.
sure really.
Huh? No, I'm not sure that they are able to hear. So, Dr. Mohammed, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. So, do we call it a day then? You're muted, sir. You're muted. I'm not able to hear you.
We hear you. I hear you. I asked my colleague if anyone have any question, any comment?
Okay.
Thank you very much for
Please
your
unmute yourself. Okay.
informative talk. May I ask a question? I am not a plastic surgeon, but from my old information that I came across, in case of electrical burn, for example, in the forearm can lead to thrombosis and damage for both ulnar and radial arteries and cause necrosis and death of the, and end with amputation of the hands. Do you use any vasodilator drugs to reopen these vessels?
Oh, an electrical burn will cause necrosis of the hands, of the part of the body which was in contact, because of 2 or 3 mechanisms. One is because of the direct damage, and because of the intense interstitial edema which it develops, which will compress externally on the vessels. What exactly happens is it induces a thrombosis within the vessels. So in these conditions, there are a few things to do. One is we will immediately assess if there is a decrease in the pulse, in the distal pulses, and assess that there is a compartment syndrome, and immediately do an escherotomy or a fasciotomy. That has to be liberal, so that we stop the extraneous pressure which is occurring on the vessels. One. Second, to prevent the thrombosis, there are either you give an adequate fluid resuscitation, you start the patient on heparin, and you cause an elevation of that particular area. That is not right up, but then the hand or the thing should not be dependent. So this is what we do. A vasodilator will essentially not help, maybe even cause a little more damage, because we will be lowering the pressure. Already the patient would be in hypovolemic shock, and you don't want a peripheral vasodilation in these cases. To prevent the thrombosis, it is either adequate fluid resuscitation and starting him on heparin, along with the liberal fasciotomy. So that is what is usually done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Professor Mohammed Ahmed Ibn Auf. Welcome, Professor Rashid.
Well, sorry, I probably had an interrupted internet here. But well, thank you very much. I think this is an excellent presentation. You have got a nice collection of photos. Just one comment and one question. The comment is about the honey. I think we had here a very nice experience, but not in the burn, probably in the diabetic foot. We use a very special type of waxed honey bean made here, and I use it actually made regular. I think has got very good results. Well, my question was, probably you might have covered this during your presentation, about the physiotherapy. When do you start physiotherapy when you have got these joint types of, I usually tell the patients that I take care of the wound, you take care of the movements. So do you have any special program for physiotherapy, especially in the upper limbs and fingers and things like that?
We start gentle physiotherapy for the lower limbs, for the chest, immediately after the first 24 hours of the burn. But regarding suppose the hand is burnt, and then when we want to start physiotherapy, we usually wait until there is some amount of wound healing. But before that, before we start a physiotherapy, we need to ensure that the healing is acceptable. That is, we cannot heal a wound where the joints are flexed, where it is not in a functional position, etc. So we splint. You splint the hand with the fingers in extension, with the wrist in neutral, with the elbow in elbow in extension, etc. And then if the joints are not involved, all those joints which are not involved with the burns, we start the physiotherapy. In the area where it is involved, we allow the wound to heal, and then start physiotherapy on those patients.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Dua. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you, Doctor, for this wonderful piece of presentation. Actually, I've always been thinking about this question. We've always been talking about heat burn. On the other side, we have cold injuries or burn, how to deal with patient exposing to liquid nitrogen and frostbites. We are living in a hot country. We don't deal with those patients. So are there any differences regarding the assessment of depth of injury and how to determine the level of damage? And we'll be so grateful if you give us any clue about how to deal and how to manage those patients. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we see frostbites only in our in people who have who are living in the hills. I'm in North India from a place which is very close to the Himalayas, so we see a few frostbites here. The essential way of the frostbites can come in early, but they mostly tend to come late when the area has become a full thickness, has become gangrenous. At that point in time, then they try to bring the patient. But if it comes early, then the way to assess is very similar to the way we are assessing any other burn lesion. But there is one important difference. In a thermal burn, we try to cool the burn very, very fast. Immediately we put the hand, that part which is affected, inside under a tap and open the water and try to cool it. Of course, we are not supposed to use ice, but then we can cool the part fast so that the thermal injury comes down. In a frostbite, the burn is because of accumulation of ice crystals within the tissues. Now, if we try to rewarm very fast, then those ice tissues melt, and that causes even more damage to the tissue at that level. So rewarming in a frostbite has to be very, very slow. You have to maybe even take a day to rewarm that part, and after you do that, then you'll again have to assess the burn wound as we have assessed for a thermal wound, whether it is partial thickness, whether it is deep, and then management will be similar and according. The dressings are essentially the similar dressings that we are using. Is that okay?
Of course, yes, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I need you, Dr. Adila, to show out to the young audience here. We know that burn is very common among pediatric group of patients and females. And now, what are the factors that might lead to a suspicion of child abuse or even those old age or handicapped patients? What are the elements that you are thinking leading to a medical legal aspect granting a patient to be protected against these abuse measures?
I'm sorry, I did not get the question actually. So,
what are the features in burn patients that might lead you to suspect abuse, an action of abuse?
What are the things that we should which you should be suspicious of as abuse? Is that what you're asking me?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. As I said, any burns which is deep, which is more than 30%, I don't believe it is an accidental burn. And almost always it turns out to be correct. Any burn which is of a more severe degree is usually a suicide or a homicide. And we will have to be very tactful in getting the history and finding out what actually happened. Why? Because even if we manage to save that girl, heal her wounds, and send her home, she's going into the same pathological atmosphere. So I have seen people who come back the second time with a similar burn and die. So we will have to assess the situation, take in the family for counseling, find out what is wrong, have a psychosocial support, a social worker who will follow up, find out what's wrong. So that is important as in major burns. In children, whenever you find a child, we've had a child who's come with some very mild scars, but then when we took a chest x-ray, there were multiple broken ribs, old broken ribs. So at that point, you have to immediately find out that there is something wrong. The child may be a victim of child abuse. Very peculiar area burns in the perineum, burns in the genitalia, cigarette butt burns, round punched out burns. So in those things, we'll have to immediately have a suspicion that something more is working in the child's house, and then take a very, very careful history. Maybe we'll have to involve the authorities in that and find out if the child can be rehabilitated. Just healing, just treating it like a doctor patient in those conditions will not really help out. We are again causing a lot of damage by not assessing the psychosocial effects of what is happening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If no more question, on behalf of our Sudanese Surgical Club, we really thank you very much, Dr. Anila Bahatisharia, for this very informative presentation.
Thank
and
you.
also we thank all of our participants, Professor Rashid Ahmed Abdullah, Professor Muhammad Ahmed Ibn Auf, our consultant, Dr. Ahmed Muhammad Adam, and all of our colleagues, and really enjoy this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to have been part of this program, and thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.